They think they've won. They think you're broken, dependent, lost, without their attention. But what they don't know is this: you've stopped needing them, and that silence they hear, it isn't weakness, it's the sound of your power returning, because narcissists don't crumble from confrontation. They collapse from indifference. You don't destroy a narcissist by yelling louder. You don't win by throwing their own games back at them. You don't beat them in the arena they built, because they've been training there their whole lives. They know how to twist your words, distort your truths, flip the script, and make you the villain. Every time you argue, every time you defend yourself, every time you try to prove your heart, you feed the illusion that they're important, that they matter, that they still have a grip on your emotions. They thrive in chaos. They want you off balance. They want you emotional, reactive, confused, exhausted. Because that's when you're easiest to manipulate, when you're too busy explaining yourself, to realize they've set the trap. But what they never expect is silence, not passive silence, not silence born out of defeat, but strategic silence, calculated, powerful, unshakable. It's the kind of silence that doesn't beg for closure, that doesn't seek validation, that doesn't flinch when poked. It's the silence that says, "I see you now, and I choose nothing." You see, narcissists aren't fueled by love. They don't care about connection. They don't seek truth or growth or intimacy. They seek reaction. It's not your love they want. It's your emotional energy, whether it's devotion, jealousy, anger, heartbreak. They don't care. As long as you feel, they still believe they have control. Every time you send a long text, every time you cry to them, every time you beg them to see your worth, they don't hear love. They hear power, because in their twisted reality, your pain is their proof that they matter. But the moment you go cold, the moment you stop answering, the moment you stop explaining, stop defending, stop caring, something inside them begins to unravel, and not because they miss you, not because they finally realize your value, but because they can no longer read you. And when a narcissist can't read you, they lose their grip. They can't manipulate what they can't measure. They can't control what they can't provoke. Your silence becomes their nightmare, because it forces them to confront the one thing they've spent their entire life avoiding, their own emptiness. And in that emptiness, they panic. They'll lash out. They'll bait you. They'll do everything to make you feel again, even if it means hurting you worse. Because as long as you feel, you're still playing. But when you feel nothing, that's when you've truly won. Narcissists don't want a partner. They don't want connection. They don't want real love. What they crave is a mirror, a perfect reflection of the fantasy they've built around themselves. Someone to nod when they speak, someone to agree, to adore, to admire. No matter how undeserving, they want applause without effort, loyalty without love, and obedience without question. They want someone who doesn't challenge them, someone who never sees behind the mask. To a narcissist, love isn't a bond. It's a tool to secure attention, praise, and control. But what happens when that mirror stops? Reflecting, what happens when you stop feeding the fantasy? When you stop responding to their tantrums, their guilt trips, their silent treatments? They don't explode in rage, not at first. No, first, they start to disintegrate because your silence does something they can't prepare for. It shatters the illusion they've worked so hard to protect. They've spent their entire lives building walls of charm, confidence, and charisma. But all of it is just a defense, a cover-up for something they'll never admit out loud. They are empty inside, behind the charm, insecurity, behind the arrogance, deep shame, behind the control, pure paralyzing fear, fear that they're unlovable, fear that without the performance they're nothing, fear that if someone saw the real them, they would walk away and never look back. That's why they keep you close with confusion. That's why they guilt you into staying, shame you for pulling away, gaslight you when you start waking up. Because if you ever see the truth, if you ever realize that their power only works when you hand it over, the illusion falls apart, and your silence, it doesn't just disturb them, it exposes them, Because silence forces them to sit with the one voice they can't drown out, their own. No applause, no validation, no echo of their greatness. Just stillness, just truth, just the cold, empty space they've been running from since the beginning. You don't need to punish a narcissist. You don't need revenge. You don't even need closure. All you need to do is stop playing the role. Walk away quietly. Refuse to reflect. Let the mirror go dark and watch who they become when they have nothing left to perform for. Because that's the thing about narcissists. They're not afraid of being wrong. They're not afraid of being hated. They're afraid of being irrelevant. And when you go silent, that's exactly what they become. You don't need to yell. You don't need to scream or explain yourself one more time. You don't need to beg to be heard. And you don't need closure. Because the truth is, closure from a narcissist is just another trap, another manipulation, another performance designed to pull you back into the chaos. What you need is distance, emotional, psychological, spiritual. The kind of distance that can't be bridged with words or apologies. The kind that creates silence, not just in your voice, but in your soul. Because the moment you detach, truly detach, you rob them of the one thing they crave more than anything else: significance. See, narcissists don't just want attention, they want to matter, to control the emotional temperature of every room they walk into, to know they can still make you cry, make you chase, make you doubt yourself, and when you stop giving them that reaction, when your heart no longer races, when your fingers no longer tremble at their texts, when their name no longer stirs emotion, you become their greatest fear. Because they don't fear being hated, they don't fear being called out, they fear being ignored, because hatred still gives them power, anger still makes them relevant, but indifference? Indifference makes them invisible, and that is your leverage. Every second you stay calm, they unravel a little more. Every silent moment you let pass, they lose a piece of the control they once held over you. They crafted an identity built on your reactions, your validation, your emotional chaos. Without it, they are lost. You were never just a partner to them. You were the audience, the spotlight, the fuel for their performance. And when the audience stops clapping, the show dies. They want your rage. They want your confusion. They want to drag you into a screaming match so they can twist your words and flip the blame. They want a reaction, because a reaction means they still own part of you. But when you give them stillness, when you respond with calm eyes and a steady heart, when you say nothing, not out of fear but out of power, that's when the illusion begins to crack, because they don't know how to survive in silence. They don't know how to exist without a stage. And the moment you stop playing your role, their mask begins to slip, not because you expose them, but because they no longer have the energy to keep pretending. And here's the twist. They'll try harder, they'll push every button, they'll provoke, love bomb, guilt trip, and blame, not because they care, but because they're drowning in the void your stillness created, and all you have to do is stay still, stay quiet, stay gone, because real power isn't loud. It's calm, it's collected, it's detached. Let them shout into the silence. Let them spin their web, hoping you'll step back in, but you won't. You've seen the pattern, you know how the story ends. And now, you're writing a new one where they are no longer the center, one where your peace isn't negotiable, one where you decide who gets access to your energy. Because silence isn't weakness, it's war. Without blood, it's strategy. Without warning, it's freedom. Without apology. And when used right, it's the one thing a narcissist can never recover from. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't storm in, guns blazing, demanding respect. Real power waits. It watches. It blends into the eye, background like shadow, silent, patient, precise. And when it strikes, it doesn't need to fight. It lets the enemy fall on their own sword. See, you don't destroy a narcissist by calling them out. You don't win by exposing them directly, because that's what they're ready for. They've rehearsed their role. They've crafted a script full of manipulation, pity, guilt, and charm. If you confront them, they'll twist your words. If you yell, they'll call you unstable. If you beg, they'll dangle fake hope. They've mastered that battlefield. So you never play. There. You don't fight narcissists head-on. That's a losing game. Instead, you become a strategist, a Machiavellian. You watch them like a scientist studying a predictable subject. You learn their patterns. You see how they twist truth until it barely resembles reality, how they cry when cornered, how they shift blame with expert timing, how they act like victims while destroying you in silence. And once you've mapped their moves, you do something they never expect. You pretend. You smile, you nod, you laugh at their stories. You act like you're still caught in their charm, still dazzled by the mask. And while they relax, thinking they've won, thinking you're still blind, they begin to expose themselves. Because here's the secret. Narcissists always overplay their hand. Always. They can't help it. They crave attention too deeply. They need to feel powerful, admired, in control. So you give them the illusion. You let them think you're still hooked. You let them talk. You let them gloat. Because every time they speak, they give you something. A breadcrumb, a contradiction, a half-truth, an arrogant confession disguised as a joke. They don't realize they're handing you a map to their weak points, a map to their lies, a map to their downfall. You don't argue. You don't correct. You don't even react. You let them build their tower, brick by brick, lie by lie. Because the higher it goes, the harder it falls. And when the moment is right, you don't announce your exit. You don't scream, "I'm done." You don't threaten to leave. You just vanish. Cold, calm, complete. They won't even realize it's happening until it's already too late. And that's real revenge. Not through violence, not through exposure, but through quiet precision, through emotional detachment and surgical strategy. They'll call you fake. They'll say you played them. But the truth is, they handed you the tools. You just paid attention because Machiavellian. Power isn't about ego. It's about outcomes. It's not about being right. It's about winning without fighting. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're weak. Let them perform while you sit in the front row, watching the mask slip inch by inch. Then, when the performance ends, don't clap, don't scream, just get up and walk away. Let gravity do what it always does. Let the tower collapse under its own weight because you don't have to destroy them. You just have to stop holding them up. And that is the art of power in silence. When you finally walk away from a narcissist, it's not loud. There's no fireworks, no dramatic monologue, no final argument to settle the score. There's just silence. Still, sharp, undeniable silence. You don't slam the door. You don't text paragraphs explaining your worth. You don't make a speech hoping they'll finally understand. You just vanish, calm, clear, confident, and that's what drives them insane. Because narcissists don't fear losing you, they fear losing control over you. They fear your clarity because it means you finally saw through the mask. It means the spell is broken. And their game? Over, they will unravel in your absence. Not because you were everything to them, but because they were everything to themselves, and you stopped reflecting that illusion. They'll say you're cold now. They'll accuse you of changing. They'll spin stories, play victim, tell everyone you were the toxic one. Not because it's true, but because they need someone to blame. And you're no longer there to defend yourself, and that silence, it echoes louder than any scream. But here's what they'll never admit. They miss your reactions, your validation, your emotional investment. They miss the game. But you don't miss the game because you finally realized you were the only one playing fair. You never needed revenge. You never needed closure from someone who was never open. What you needed was clarity. And once you found it, everything changed because clarity brings peace, and peace is what they can never touch. They live in noise. They live in lies. They need conflict to feel alive. But you chose peace. You chose you. And here's the twist. You didn't win by defeating them. You won by walking away without looking back. No tears, no rage, just self-respect dressed as silence. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing at all. You don't need to destroy a narcissist. They're already their own undoing. They just don't know it yet. All you have to do is step back, let them talk, let them lie, let them manipulate, give them the stage they crave, and then say nothing. Because when the applause fades and the spotlight dims, they're left alone with the very thing they fear most, the truth. They unravel not because you expose them, but because you stopped needing to. See, narcissists need someone to project onto, someone to gaslight, guilt trip, love bomb, and discard on repeat. But when you stop playing the role, when your silence becomes your answer, they panic, not because they care about you, but because they can't control you anymore, and that's the final blow. Not rage, not revenge, just distance. Still, calculated, unapologetic distance. Because silence in the hands of someone who is healed isn't weakness. It's strategy, it's surgical, it's precise. It makes them nervous because it forces them to talk too much, defend too much, reveal too much, all while you say absolutely nothing. You don't need to call them out. You don't need to prove anything. The people who are watching will start to notice. They'll connect the dots on their own, and your silence will say everything they need to hear. This was never about revenge. It was always about freedom. Freedom from their mind games. Freedom from their emotional roller coaster. Freedom from needing their validation. Freedom from shrinking yourself to protect their ego. You finally saw it. The illusion, the mask, the empty performance behind all that charm, and instead of fighting, you healed. You got quiet. You got stronger. Because silence isn't retreat. It's war. A quiet war. The kind only people with self-control can win. And you did. They thought you'd always beg, that you'd always explain, that you'd always come running back, apologizing for things they did, but you didn't. You became unreadable. You became still. You became powerful. You chose peace over chaos, self-worth over validation, clarity over confusion. And now, you're untouchable. They can't reach you anymore. Because you're no longer in the place where they can play God. You've risen above the noise, and they'll never figure out how you did it, because power like yours doesn't need to shout. It just walks away and never looks back.